In my day-to-day experience of supporting people who are going through all kinds of deep grief, what I witness very often is a lot of fear. A fear of the emotions, a fear of the actual experience of feeling through grief itself. And that's one of the things that is most difficult culturally. And I really agree with what Dr. Joanne Cacciatore has said about how our culture responds to people in deep grief. The idea that you need to be over it in a relatively short time. And we can't gauge our grieving experience as this will be done in a few months or even a year. And what she says is that she suspects that the bypassing of traumatic grief may be the greatest threat facing humankind today, responsible for immense suffering from addictions and abuse to social disconnection and perhaps even war. When we disconnect from our grief, we disconnect from ourselves. When we disconnect from ourselves, we disconnect from others and from the natural world. This insidious cycle of unnecessary suffering that pervades families, communities, cultures, and generations. And I see this all the time, that we do not want to engage in our suffering, yet suffering is the way that we get through. I happen to be watching a series, some of you will know, Downton Abbey. Sometimes I relate to that Englishness, and I like to dive into something like that. And I happen to be watching the part where there is a traumatic sudden death. The characters, Lady Mary and Matthew, are this young couple who've just had a baby. And they're delighted, excited, full of that wonderful exhilaration of new life. And Matthew leaves Mary in the hospital, driving back, and is involved in a car accident, this tragic car accident. And they show the scene of him lying there, and it's obvious that he's died. And then it cuts, and we're left with this imprint of just tragedy. In the next series, we go to 6 months later. And this is all set in kind of the early 1920s. And Mary herself appears kind of like a zombie, numb. She's unable to connect with her baby son. And she wears black, which was very common in those times. And she is being kept in this bubble especially by her father, Lord Grantham, who is really pushing to keep her in this kind of isolation. And yet others around her know that this is not helpful. Her brother-in-law, Tom, who is also a young widow, knows too well that he needs to support and help her to re-engage. She's isolating. She's very numb. And especially in those times, and in England, it was not the done thing to share or even speak about feelings. And so we're witnessing Mary just so full of this depression of her grief, so hopeless, unable to be in a space of life, of living. It's like her spark has gone, that divine spark within, like it's really just down to the embers, muted. And in the story, the butler, Carson, who has known Lady Mary her entire life, he comes and speaks to her and attempts to redirect her, attempts to support her in connecting again with her community, her family. And she's met with Mary's derision and anger, and she is appalled that anyone would suggest that she move out of this space of intensity. And so Carson leaves, and the person who is able to reach her is her grandmother. And her grandmother, sitting with her, tells her that it's time to choose between walking a path of death or walking in life. And something occurs within Mary, some realization, and she goes down to where the butler's place is and apologizes to Carson. And in that moment of apology, of forgiving him for how he was trying to help and support her, there's a recognition that he cares, that he really wants the best for her. And something breaks inside of her, and it's like the dam bursts, and she starts to express tears and emotion, something she can't do with her immediate family, because that kind of thing, it's just not done. And yet here with Carson, she can be her authentic self, and she cries, and he holds her and allows her and tells her, that's right. This is just what you need. You need to have a really good cry. And of course, the reality is we need more than just one good cry. And that at 6 months of this numbness, this frozen grief that is within her, it's going to need multitude times of letting it through, letting it out. But in the story, we see that that shift has helped Mary to gain a new perspective. And in the next scene, we see her out of her black widow's weeds and dressed in lavender, which was, again, an acceptable colour as people went through their mourning. And she's able to engage with individuals at this particular luncheon, and we see it's not like she's intensely happy or anything like that, but she's re-engaging. And the character of Mary is very resilient, but grief had swiped her, especially because it was traumatic grief, and it had just laid her low. And in her grief, she was frozen within her emotions and unable to move through that process. And the more I thought about this, I thought about how it's so important for us to be able to find a different way to relate to grief. Culturally, we say things like, oh, it's so bad. The grief itself is intensely awful. And I'm wondering about the metaphors for grief, heavy and weighty like a stone. And then I imagine little Otter. Otter is a very playful, very sweet animal that moves and flows in water. And I imagine Otter holding a stone, a weighty stone in their little paws, clutching it as a precious object, because they always keep a stone that they particularly like, and they use it to smash open shellfish. I imagine this stone of grief smashing my experience of deep loss, because grief itself is a process for healing loss. And so it requires, we have to move that inner grief, the thoughts, the feelings, the heaviness, the depth of that suffering and pain. We have to move that outwardly. We have to somehow let it come up and release and mourn, that cathartic release. And that's what we're asked to do. Can you embrace your grief as a tool, as a means for healing it, using it to smash your way through the despair, the sorrow, the sadness, the loneliness, the isolation, and empty out until all the tears, the racking sobs, the heartache have dispersed for now? And breathe, and breathe, and come back to the grief, knowing it will be your way through. Grief demands to be expressed. Many authors, many writers who are very aware of the full nature and truth of the grief experience tell us about the embracing of it. We have to embrace it, we have to lean into it. And having that different perspective on grief can change how you feel about the experience. When emotions rise up and you feel it, there's that sense of weightiness, of heaviness, of it stuck in the throat area, or the sense of it in lying like a heavy weight in the stomach. But knowing that this is what's required for healing, to allow grief its expression. Can we change our perspective just a little and also engage in kindness to self, compassion for self, because that's going to also build your resilience to cope with, to get through. And then every outpouring, every wave of sadness can be expressed and expelled. And as you keep growing in your own awareness of connecting in, what do I feel today? How can I move this through? And sometimes it's as simple as taking a walk, to move outside, to be in nature and just get moving. It's not always about crying, although for some people that's just a huge and important way through. But not everybody can connect into that, and movement can be so helpful. And that's why we use breath. That's why we use breath work to assist us in that expression outwardly. But that recognition and understanding that grief is not the enemy. Grief is not here to make things harder for you in your life. This unbearable pain, the awful experience of a traumatic and sudden loss that comes in so suddenly and so quickly, so unexpected, it can lay you so low, and for such a seemingly long time. And yet time and space, it has no bearing in the experience that you as a unique individual going through this, you'll take the time that you need. And it's important to give that to yourself. That's a kindness. And of course, when something is so sudden and traumatic, we often need that support and that help from outside. And that's always a positive thing, to seek out help, maybe a one-on-one support or a group. Because when it's a traumatic loss, it complicates things. There's no time for goodbye. There's no time for that inner knowing that this will happen. And acknowledging the reality of this takes longer. But the biggest element against us is when we push back, when we resist or bypass grief. And fear will drive that bypass. When we're immobilized, imprisoned, or paralyzed by fear, that's when our feelings get pushed down and we find ourselves walking through the world like Mary, so numb and so resistant to her own emotions and feelings that she couldn't allow herself to feel, to be sad, to let that sorrow move through. And so finding the ways that we can approach that kindly and lovingly to ourselves. But that I feel personally that changing our perspective on what this experience of grief itself is all about, that in this process we will be able to heal eventually. And as intense and as awful as our feelings are in the beginning, allowing that grief to find its own organic rhythm, its own way to move through us. And what we have to do is feel it. Easier said than done, I know. We resist our feelings at the best of times. We defend against emotional pain. But beginning a process of just the recognition that this grief is here to help me heal, and to begin to learn how to lean into it, how to start naming what you feel, turning inwards, is also then how we begin to rekindle that light inside of us. When there is depression, there's no longer those embers building into a spark, a glow. It just feels cold. And the only way to ignite that, to get that alight, is to keep turning inward, to give our pain the attention it absolutely needs and must have. And so a piece of this is to bring in a recognition that this is sacred and honor the pain that you feel, because it means that we're going to recognize the value of and respect that this pain is the measure of the love. It's a measure of the connection and what has been deep and true and authentic with your beloved. And the capacity to love requires that we mourn, and to honor grief is life-sustaining. Even though most of us have been taught that pain and sadness are somehow wrong, and pain and feelings of loss are what we try and avoid. But this is such a huge misunderstanding in our culture. It is normal and natural to feel a huge depth of pain when we have had a huge depth of love. Sadness, suffering, sorrow are symptoms of that wound. And so we have to give attention to our emotional wounds and allowing the expression of that, however you do that, whether it's through that recognition that it's like an energy that needs to move. If you break the word emotion down, E for energy demands and requires motion, emotion. And children instinctively know this. Children instinctively know if they fall down, they cry, they holler, they howl. And then a butterfly comes along and it's all gone. But they allow in the moment that expression that demands to be up and out. And so we have to relearn. It's like you've been thrust into a classroom that you never wanted to go into, to learn how to be connected to that inner landscape. And the only way through is to keep connecting to the feelings, the allowance of those feelings, and to learn deep kindness and compassion for self. To keep coming back to, what do I need to get me through today? And grief is up and down. It's intense in the moment, and then like a wave, it'll wash against the shore, and you'll have moments that aren't as intense. And those moments will gradually get a little longer. And we have to allow the movement of that deep intensity to just come through us. People say it's the hardest journey that they've ever been on. And it requires great resilience. We have to keep digging in to just keep going, which is why it's so important to find the things that resonate, that help, that support you. And maybe it's turning to a friend that you can ask, will you just walk with me? Someone that you can feel comfortable with if you do get a sudden grief burst and have to stop and just bawl in the moment, which is so normal and natural as those waves come through us. Finding the ways that support you in your grief. Gentle movement, a walk round the park, in the garden, or sitting quietly, silently. Journaling, writing, finding the ways to express. All of this is mourning. It's moving the grief that's inside us outward. So when you consider that your work here for healing is to allow yourself exactly what you need in the moment that you need it. Be kind, be compassionate. And that itself is a huge leap for a lot of people. I know that people often find it hard to know what it means to be kind to self or self-compassion. What does that look like? What does it mean? It comes down to some really simple things. It means attending to what your body needs, good nutrition, sustenance, taking breaks when you need them, listening to what the body is saying when you're so tired and exhausted and you need to lie down, or sometimes if you've had to go back to work, asking for those little breaks. Or if you're at a gathering and you didn't really want to go, but you're there now and everything seems to be caving in on you, then go early. Ask people to respect your decision, not to add to your guilt. You have to look to your routines. You have to change the things, the small things that really are then going to help you get through. So attending to the body needs, attending to your heart and your mind, finding a way to share your emotions openly and honestly, whatever that looks like, with a trusted friend. And when you feel pain, view it as stored energy. Start seeing these inner experiences as stored energy passing through your heart and before the eye of your consciousness. What does that mean? It means to take a breath in that moment, to do the opposite of what you would normally do perhaps, which is to defend against it, contracting, closing, getting tight and tense, which is instinctual. We do that, we close down without being aware of it. But every time We resist and close. We're building up that pain inside. To be free of sorrow, sadness, and deep grief, to heal, we accept it, we turn towards it, and let it keep finding and working its way through. And breath helps us so much. To stop, to just take a few deep breaths. You might listen to the podcast Breathe, Just Breathe. The other things that we can do are small micro rituals, lighting a candle or setting an empty place at the table, acknowledging that connection to our beloved, not just ignoring it, having a little space in the home where photographs and mementos are held as sacred. It's not going to make you sadder. You're sad and you're heavy with grief. It'll give you a point to stop, to honor that grief, and then to let it out in that moment, perhaps. Do the things that truly resonate with you. The biggest piece is to give yourself that time to listen to what's going on inside of you, to sense and feel what it is that your body's asking you to do, what your emotions are demanding for you to do. And it does take time, and it's a new practice often for many people. Finding a compassionate healing space to just sit and be. Discerning who you can be with others who are kind and who can listen. And when you feel up to it, to reach out, to get back out into the community, maybe around 3 to 4 months after a traumatic sudden event is when people, often friends and other family members, are going back to their normal. And that's when you need that extra support, that extra help. Finding your tribe, finding an appropriate support group or connection with others. And a simple practice of mindfulness, being open to the reality of the present moment, dropping into I'm here. We can do that when we sit in nature, when we simply look at what's in front of us and breathe, whether that's a tree or a shrub or a flower, but just sitting in that quiet moment and breathing will calm your nervous system so greatly. And that's kind. Things that will sustain you, support you, is being kind to self, compassionate to self. So breathe, just breathe. Take a moment right now and ask yourself, what am I feeling? What am I sensing? And breathe it through. Inhaling and exhaling consciously, mindfully. And even just doing that for a few rounds, that's kind. And listening to this podcast is a kindness. Trying to learn and find out more about what can be helpful, what's going to resonate. Keep searching for the things that help you. Keep listening to the things that ease that beautiful heart. Thank you for listening. I wish peace to your heart.